This is my Resistance Combat Transport Shuttle, modified from the Resistance ITS Transport set and using two 501st Battle Packs as the majority of my pieces for all my mods. We'll go ahead and take a look at everything that I did on the outside, and then we'll head inside. And really quickly, before we dive into the mods, and don't worry, this isn't a sponsorship, we're all aware that it's the holiday season, and I know this might be a little bit late, but I managed to get my hands on a Santa sleigh set, and in tradition and in theme with my channel, I mostly modify spaceships and vehicles, or that's what I try and turn sets into. So I would like to ask for your guys' community input on what I need to do to this set. What I'd like to do is take a set that's actively available on store shelves right now that any of you guys could purchase yourselves, and then combine it with Santa's sleigh to try and blend Christmas and Santa into the Star Wars universe. So make sure you drop those suggestions down below and I'll see what I can do. Now into the transport. I unfortunately missed out on this set when it was on shelves, but quite literally just a few days after it retired, I wanted one and I couldn't find it anywhere. But luckily, I was still able to find it at retail price from a Mercari seller. And like I mentioned previously, a lot of the pieces that I used for these mods came from two 501st Battle Packs, so you'll probably recognize quite a few of those pieces going around the ship. But I also used quite a few extra pieces from my collection as well, so it can't be said that this is using just two 501st Battle Packs. But going over the ship, starting up at the front, I think we all know the cannons had to be changed. Those stud shooters up front looked alright, I guess. They looked alright enough, but they were really stubby and they didn't really look like they could do any real damage. So I swapped them out for some longer, heavier cannons using these two bar pieces. And then I built up some heavier armor around the base connecting them to the main ship. And both cannons still rotate up and down, but I like to think in universe that they're static facing forward. Around this cylindrical turret area, I actually used quite a few pieces to help fill out this empty space and make it look a little bit more full. Doing the majority of the filling is this large 1x4 slope piece that fits perfectly under these winglet pieces here. And then a jumper on the side for a tiny bit of greebling wherever I could work it in. And then a few more sloping pieces as well as this bracket that lets us put studs on the side with a jumper on top to help hide this gap in here. Without that there, you can see a little bit of that red Technic pin peeking out, and I'm just not a huge fan of that, so with this simple little build, I've covered that up. On top of the ship, above the main interior section, you can see I've swapped out quite a few tiles for a lot of the pieces from the 501st Battle Packs. I made use of quite a few sticker tiles going right down the center of the ship. It gives me a little bit of extra detail where I otherwise couldn't have it. And then following the sticker tiles towards the rear, now we're headed into the rear gunner seat area and the roof details that I've done above that. So above the gunner seat on the original set was rather plain, if it had anything, maybe just this large sloping piece. But I decided to go a little bit more in depth with it, making use of a lot of cheese wedge pieces and some different sloping bits. And then this gap between the cheese wedges and this one plate going down the middle as well adds a little bit of extra depth to the ship. I'm a big fan of this section of the ship now. I think it looks a lot better, like it was actually designed with a purpose in mind. Whereas on the original set being rather plain, it didn't really have much going on back here. And following these details towards the rear of the ship, now we get on to that rear gunner seat and everything I've done back here. So in order to add the gunner seat, I obviously had to extend the rear fuselage of the ship to gain a little bit more space to be able to fit a minifigure inside. So that means I had quite a few studs to cover up on the side, but luckily these large engine connections actually cover it up quite well. You can even see these empty studs from the top when you look at it from just the right angle. But in play and when you're just looking around the ship, you can hardly even notice that there's a gap there. And since anything I added in here was just going to be covered up by this engine block, I decided to leave them empty. So obviously using that dome piece from the original set as my gunner seat windscreen, then on either side I actually did decide to keep the stud shooters in here. I do think there's certain times and places where stud shooters look good, and up front definitely wasn't one of those places. But on the rear section, I don't think it looks too bad. Since this ship isn't meant to be in ship-to-ship combat, it doesn't really need heavy firepower in the rear, so having some smaller, simpler cannons makes a little bit more sense. But just in case you don't think this is enough firepower, in the event that the transport shuttle is being pursued, we have two ion cannons underneath the gunner seat windscreen here. These target the pursuing ship's power and shield systems, so in the event that they do want to try and chase, they're probably not going to get very far. And besides the rear gunner seat, we only have one more exterior mod to go over, and that was just staggering the endings of the engines. I think on the original set, all the engines ended on the exact same stud, and I didn't really like that. So these smaller inner engines are actually pushed back by I believe one stud length. So they're not all quite lined up and even anymore, and it adds a little bit more depth to this rear backside. And now from there, with the exterior covered, we can finally head inside, starting up front with the cockpit. So up front inside the cockpit, many of you guys might be surprised to find out that I didn't actually change anything at all. Those of us that are familiar with this set understand that this cockpit space is incredibly cramped and tiny. So you can only naturally assume that a mod video would have a fix or an upgrade to this cockpit area. And while I am planning to do that, I didn't want to do that in this video. The main connections that allow these side cylindrical portions to attach to the cockpit are actually housed in these Technic beams in here. So increasing the amount of space I had in the cockpit was going to be a very large project, and I wasn't quite ready for that. And I didn't quite have the time for that considering this video's got to be up on Saturday. So maybe we'll see those mods in a part 2, but as for now, the cockpit is essentially standard from the original set. However, unlike the cockpit, the main interior section I did heavily modify. So heading to the main interior section of this ship, you can see I've crammed in quite a few minifigures from the set. We'll go ahead and get them out so we can get a better look at what I did in there. Now with all of our minifigures out, we can get a much better look at our trooper bay with weapon racks galore. Like I said, this ship is meant to bring troops in and out of combat, but it can bring supplies as well. And around the main section of this interior space alone, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weapon clips on the inside here. 8 if you're counting the door-mounted blaster. And speaking of this door-mounted blaster, it looks like the designer of this ship took some cues from the Rogue One U-Wing. Very similar to a small little play feature on the U-Wing where it had a side-mounted stud shooter. I've worked in this side-mounted cannon, so any troopers coming or going from the ship are properly covered with blaster fire. And whenever all of your troopers are loaded back inside, you can fold the blaster back in, close the top hatch and your bottom door as well, and it closes up no problem with plenty of minifigure space inside. You can even fold it into the door if you want to, so you have space for minifigure arms and weapons sticking out. Along with the side-mounted cannon, the doors themselves actually have a little bit of a feature on them. Here you can see I've worked in some clear 1x2 tiles, and those actually double as lights. Attached to the top half of the side panels, these are here so that when troops are deploying, the battlefield is properly lit up for them so they can see everything. And if you want to, when they're folded back inside, they can double as lights to light up the interior section. Other than the large weapon rack in the rear, up front, we actually have an extra gunner seat / command console. So in between these two weapon racks, we have a little bit of a control panel built up on the wall with these 2 printed pieces. The top one with your viewfinder so you can identify your targets, and then the bottom one with your controls and a few extra screens for some extra additional information. And then right in front of the control panel, we have a simple little seat build for 1 minifigure. So now if the pilot up front needs a little bit of extra assistance in combat, a minifigure can hop into this seat and help out. So then from that gunner seat, the last thing to do is take a closer look at this weapon rack on the rear. And because it's a little hard to get the camera in there, I'm just going to remove it to make it easier. So here we can take a better look at that little weapon rack. Being able to hold up to 4 weapons, we have 2 clips on either side for some larger or longer blasters, and then the 2 arms going down the middle for any shorter blasters you might have. We'll go ahead and reattach that inside so our troopers can have plenty of weapons when they go into battle, and we'll close that up and we'll head on to the final section. And now, finally, we can take a look at that rear gunner seat. In order to get inside, you can push up on the dome piece down here, or grab it from either sides right here. And with that lifted off, we can get a much better look inside the gunner seat. Right now I've got an Astromech Jordan there, but let's get him out and we can take a better look at our controls and all the space. I say all the space, but it seems whoever designed the cockpit also designed this rear gunner seat because it's quite cramped inside. However, despite it being so cramped, you can still fit a droid like you saw earlier or a minifigure inside. Going over the inside here though, you can see we have some very simple joysticks using those fire extinguisher heads in black. And then 1 printed control panel piece inside as well. Because this area is surrounded by the engines, I wasn't able to heavily modify it too much to gain more space. I did try and hollow out these walls to reclaim a little bit of arm space for minifigures, but I decided solid bricks was a little bit more structurally sound and safer for this rear section. Just in front of the controls, we have those ion cannons and that little bit of greebling around the cockpit windscreen. And then just above the seat here, you can see we have the 2 stud connection to hold on the roof. These 2 studs keep this roof piece securely on here so it's not going to fall off during play, but also make it very easy to detach when you want to get inside. And with that, that pretty much covers the entire rear gunner seat. Let's go ahead and get our droid gunner back in there, just in case anybody decides to follow us. And with that, that pretty much covers everything I did to the Resistance Combat Transport Shuttle. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and these mods as well. If you missed out on picking up this set during its run like I did, I would recommend picking one up as soon as you can before the price gets any higher, because I think it's certainly worth it. And as well, it's the only set as of now based on Galaxy's Edge. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video and these mods. Go ahead and let me know what you guys thought down below. And of course, if you have any alternate build or mod suggestions, you can drop those down below as well. Make sure you subscribe so you can stay up to date on any alternate builds or mods that I post, especially going into this 2023 season. We're going to have a lot of sets that we need to get our hands on and do some good mods too. And other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Peace, fellas.